Hello again. It's been a while. Man, lots happened since we were here last. This is the Brother Buckeye Broadcast. I am your brother Buckeye Doug, Big Doug Daniels Holzmeyer, and wow. So I'm listening to The Fan in Columbus, driving in, and this is the show that's it's Bo and friends, Bo Bishop and friends, and they were all kind of pumped up for an Oregon, Washington to Big Ten kind of thing. But during the show, that had changed apparently. And it looked like that wasn't going to happen. There was talk about Florida State and Colorado and all of that stuff. So I go to work all day. I work at the mattress firm at Easton and Diamond Plaza, the corner of Stelzer and Morris Road. And once I'm doing that stuff, I don't check Buckeye stuff because there's a lot of work to do selling mattresses and box springs and foundations and adjustable bases. So I wrap things up at 8 o'clock. I'm headed home and listening to ESPN radio on the way home because I think there was a Cleveland Guardian game on The Fan. I'm hearing all this stuff about what happened Friday afternoon. Washington and Oregon get extended invites to the Big Ten, and they accept. And the Pac-12, as we knew it, is basically done. Because not only did Colorado leave for the Big 12, so did Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. Yikes. Yikes. I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame because the Pac-12 was arguably, did I butcher that? SEC Big Ten, you could say that the Pac-12 was next, followed by the ACC and the Big 12. Now the Pac-12 is the Pac-4 with Oregon State, Washington State. My son went to Washington State and then Nevada-Reno. So essentially that conference is done unless somehow they convince the best of the Mountain West to come to them instead of the other way around. Yeah, you could get Nevada-Reno, UNLV, Hawaii, San Diego State, maybe Fresno State, along with Boise State, Colorado State. And you could keep Colorado, Utah in the fold as coverage map entities, add Hawaii, and bring in the state of Nevada. I always thought it was weird that you had California, then Nevada, and then the state of Utah. It was kind of weird that way. But you still lose the state of Arizona and Tucson and Phoenix. But most of the chatter has been the other way around. Most of the chatter has been Stanford going independent, which they could pull off, and Washington State and Oregon State going to the Mountain West. And I even heard something that was kind of frightening to me because I spent 8 years in Reno. So Nevada is important to me and my son and my wife. There was talk that the Mountain West would take Oregon State and Washington State and maybe Cal and then drop Nevada and a couple of other quote unquote bottom feeders in the Mountain West. So not only wouldn't Nevada go to the Pac whatever, which would be kind of neat, but they would be booted out of the Mountain West. That would be awful. So anyway, that's a whole nother subject. I feel bad for the Pac, it used to be the Pac-8 and then the Pac-10 and then the Pac-12. It was a really good conference. They had an opportunity to add Texas and Oklahoma at one point. They didn't do it. They blew it. So you snooze, you lose, and I'm in the mattress business, and I know what that means. You sleep through your alarm, and the alarms were going off. And whoever was running that show, I think it was a guy named Larry Scott. He didn't do anything right. He made every mistake you could possibly make. So that is that. Oregon, Washington, now members of the Big Ten. Now I'm going to give you a historic perspective. These are the winning percentages all time. 1869, when Rutgers started playing college football, until about 2021, because the site that I go to wasn't updated for 2022. The all-time winning percentage teams in the Big Ten are Ohio State at number 1, followed by Michigan, USC, Penn State, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, Wisconsin at 8, UCLA 9, Oregon 10, Minnesota 11, Iowa, Purdue, Maryland, Illinois, Rutgers, Northwestern. Indiana is the worst all-time program in the Big Ten, despite some recent success, although not last year. Now, if you just take this century, that order is much different. Ohio State is still number 1. Oregon is number 2. Wisconsin is 3. USC is 4. Michigan is 5. Iowa is 6. Penn State 7. Michigan State 8. And then the back half 8 of the new Big 18 is at number 9, Nebraska, followed by Northwestern, who would have thunk, Washington, UCLA, Minnesota, Maryland, Purdue, Rutgers, Illinois, and guess who's last again? Indiana. Now, if you just take 2016 to 2021, it's Ohio State number 1 again. So if anyone questions what is the best program in the history of the Big Ten, it is Ohio State, despite that weird, Michigan won a bunch of Big Ten championships before Ohio State was in the conference, and they were playing high school teams and club teams and intramural teams. So even their total wins is bogus, but their winning percentage, even with all that fantasy wins, still less than Ohio State. So 2016 to present, which I think would be recency, Ohio State's number 1, Wisconsin 2, Michigan 3, should be Penn State there at number 4. I keep making that mistake. Every time I try to type a P, it comes out O, no matter what I do. Iowa's 5, Washington 6, Oregon 7, Minnesota 8. The second 8 since 2016 gives you an idea that USC hasn't been really all that fantastic recently. USC is 9, Michigan State 10, Northwestern 11, Indiana 12, Purdue 13, UCLA 14, Nebraska 15. Nebraska's fallen on real hard times. Maryland is 16, Illinois at 17, although I think that's going to change, and Rutgers is at 18. Now, this is where I would put the teams, my rankings, taking the historical rankings, the this century rankings, and the recency rankings based on what's happened the last couple of years. Making this like right now, I think the best programs are Ohio State, despite the last 2 losses to Michigan. It was Ohio State that came within a field goal of winning the national championship, not Michigan. Ohio State number 1, Michigan number 2, though, followed by Penn State, USC, Oregon, Washington, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Those are my top 8 teams. Second half of the Big Ten, I would have UCLA 9, Iowa 10, Michigan State 11, because I'm just not sold on Mel Tucker for the long term. Maryland at 12 because they're recruiting well. I got Nebraska at 13 until Matt Rule shows me that he's going to flip that. I think he will. Then Illinois at 14, Purdue at 15, Indiana at 16, Northwestern at 17 because of the Pat Fitzgerald thing, and Rutgers 18. Although I like Greg Schiano a lot, I was tempted to put Rutgers actually ahead of Indiana, Northwestern, and maybe Purdue, but we'll see. Now, last part of this particular broadcast, by the way, you are watching the Buckeye Brother Broadcast. I prefer the term broadcast as opposed to podcast because I did radio for 43 years. I'm a broadcaster. So if I was, and I just put this together very quickly, I'm subject to change. If I were to create an East-West, or leaders, legends kind of thing, being hand-tied by having to put USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon in the left part of it, which makes it kind of difficult, I would have the Big Ten Woody be Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin. So you have 4 really good programs, followed by Maryland, Illinois, and Purdue, Midland programs, and then bottom feeders, Indiana and Rutgers. That would be the 9 representing sort of kind of the East. And then the Big Ten Bo, or the Big Ten John McKay, if you will, if you want to use a USC legendary coach. I would have Michigan in there, although Ohio State, Michigan would be a crossover game. USC, Oregon, Washington, got to do that. Nebraska, I'd put Nebraska in there. Nebraska needs to recruit California better anyway, so I think this would help them do that. Then Minnesota, UCLA, Iowa, and Northwestern. Now, there are fewer bottom feeders in that left-west division. Only Northwestern would qualify as a bottom feeder. Iowa, UCLA, Minnesota, Nebraska, Washington, Oregon, USC, Michigan are good programs. But having said that, I think Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Michigan State, I think those top four would be somewhat comparable to the top four in the other division, especially Maryland and Illinois, Purdue. Yeah, I mean, maybe you could move, maybe you could move. I don't want to do that. I don't want to move. You could maybe move Illinois over to the left side of the ledger and move who over to the right side. I just don't see any. So again, it was sort of off the top of my head. Actually, when I look at this closer, I kind of like it. And here's the thing, folks. What's going to happen? And you know it and I know it. No way in heck did they bring USC and UCLA and now Washington to Oregon in without the idea of Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State playing those teams, 2 of the 4 each year. Now, it was going to be Ohio State playing USC one year, UCLA the next, and then playing USC the third year and UCLA the next. That's the way it was going to be. No way, for television purposes, are you bringing in those 4 former Pac-12 teams and not having Ohio State playing, for example, in 2024, Oregon away to make up for the COVID game, and then UCLA at home, year 1. 2025, USC at home, or USC in California, probably, and Washington at home. They're going to play 2 of those teams, and those 4 teams are going to play Michigan twice. It's going to happen. It's not. No way is the Big Ten going to have Ohio State play one of those 4 each year. It's not going to happen. So what I'm saying is the days of going 12-0 and then 13-0 by winning the Big Ten championship, it was hard enough to do even with it the way it was before USC and UCLA was in the mix. I mean, Ohio State lost to Iowa and Purdue and ruined great seasons. And Virginia Tech, the one year we did win the national championship. There's just no way you're going to play Oregon and UCLA plus Michigan, and in some years Penn State, because you got Michigan every year. The Iowas and the Wisconsins, especially those road games. I don't know. I think 11-1 would be considered a great season as long as you win the Big Ten championship and the Michigan game is a win, which you're not going to do every year. That's just not going to happen. What we experienced the first 20 years of this century is not the norm. It's just not going to happen. So you're probably going to lose to Michigan once every three years. Hopefully it's no more than that. And hopefully it's less than that. But let's say you lose to Michigan every 3 years. You're going to lose to one of the Oregon, USC, Washington, UCLA games, especially if they're out there. once or, once every 3 years. You're probably going to lose to the group of Wisconsin, Iowa, Penn State once every 3 years. No, you're not going to lose to Rutgers. But Maryland they're just better. They have more talent. So Maryland's a tough out. Purdue, when they're good, is a tough out. Illinois is going to get better. And we know. So here's the thing. And thank goodness we have a 12-team playoff coming up very soon. But a 10-2 record with a Big Ten championship, so 11-2, might be the norm going forward starting in 2024. You could go 9-3 as long as you won the Big Ten championship, got into the Big Ten championship. And I haven't even talked about the non-conference game. Yes, one of those will be a MAC school from the Ohio, Toledo, Bowling Green, Akron, Kent, Ohio, Miami of Ohio. So every year, Ohio State's going to play one of those MAC teams. And there's going to be one other game. Well, wonder if one of those other games is Georgia or Texas or Alabama or Notre Dame like we have this year. I mean, that had been the plan, to play one outstanding non-conference team home and away. Can you still do that with the Big Ten almost certainly going to a 10-game schedule so you can play all but 7 of the other teams each year? So if you're playing Alabama or Georgia or Texas or Oklahoma, those are possibly a loss. And then you play Oregon and USC, although I wouldn't think you'd play both of those in the same year. But let's say Oregon is on the schedule. Let's say you got a year where it's Georgia, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, and a Wisconsin on the schedule. So expectations, I want to keep them high. What this means is that Ohio State's recruiting, which is already just second to Georgia and Alabama right now, although technically Ohio State's number 2, Alabama always catches up. But you've got to always be in the top 3. You can't have a year where you're number 5. Ohio State was number 5, 4 or 5 this past year. And on the defensive side of the ball, you got to do better than what they've been doing here in recent years. They've been good, very good, but not spectacular. So that's the deal, folks. The recruiting on the defensive side of the ball has to improve. I would suggest to the Big Ten, if they go to a 10-game schedule, that the Ohio State folks start canceling some of these high-profile games, because we have high-profile opponents with the addition of Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. And you're going to be playing 2 of those every year. So make it a MAC team and make it one other team, like an AAC team, like an SMU. We've played Tulsa. How about Cincinnati from time to time, although that's a Big 12 team. That's a Power 5 team. I'm okay with the Boston colleges. Okay with the Pitts and the West Virginias. Would be fine with Notre Dame, even though, that's a tough out. But Louisville, if you're going to do a Power 5 team, it really should be the Kentuckys, the North Carolina States, the Wake Forests. Because if you're going to be playing the Clemsons and the Alabamas and Georgias and the Florida States and the Oklahomas, teams of that nature, plus a 10-game Big Ten schedule with the likelihood that there's going to be 5 or 6, maybe 7 really tough outs, you may schedule yourself outside of the 12-team playoff. It could happen, which would be not good. So that's sort of an off the top of my head Monday recap of what's happened in terms of the Big Ten bringing in Washington and Oregon. I think it's kind of neat, but I'm a little concerned that it's one thing to play USC and UCLA every other year. It's another to play Oregon and UCLA every, once a year, and then the next year playing Washington and USC. Makes it much tougher. Great games, but I remember 1986 when Ohio State went out to play Washington and we lost 40-7. Those West Coast trips. I remember the 1975 Rose Bowl season game. It was actually the 1976 Rose Bowl, but it was the 1975 season. Ohio State had pounded UCLA 41-21 earlier in the season. Maybe it was 42-21. And then they played UCLA again in the Rose Bowl, and UCLA beat Ohio State 23-10 and ruined the national championship season. Those West Coast games are a bear. Of course, it's going to be just as rough for Oregon and UCLA, Washington, and USC to come to the Midwest and the Far East. I'm excited, but at the same time, expectations can still remain high. But the idea of going 12-0 every season, 13-0 before getting the playoffs, we may have seen the last of that. And frankly, we haven't gotten there the last two seasons because of the losses to Michigan. So there you are. That's my take on what happened on Friday. We'll start talking about camp happenings, who's shining and who's not, who's injured, who's healthy. But I wanted to do this one first because everybody's talking about it. Go Buckeyes. So excited about the 2020 season, keeping my fingers crossed that Pryor and Williams and Henderson are healthy, that nothing happens to Marvin Harrison, that McCord and or Devin Brown live up to their 5-star rankings, and that Knowles puts the defenders in a position to not only win games, but to not give up those big plays. And I was worried about that when he said, we expect 3 or 4 big plays a game. No, you don't. Jim Tressel's teams didn't do that. They just didn't give up those big plays. That's why they beat Michigan 9 times out of 10. You don't do Don Brown defense. You don't do it. There's no need to do it with the talent Ohio State has, because the players that you're recruiting should be able to break through the offensive line and get to the quarterback without a bunch of junk, risky plays. Now, I know I'm going all over the place, and my coffee has gone cold. That's my Mattress Firm Synchrony coffee cup. Even though it's in let me take a sip of this. Yep, it's lukewarm. So I'm going to get myself a fresh cup of coffee. Thanks for being with me. If you like, make some predictions on what you think of the new Big Ten, the barely legal Big Ten, now that there's 18 teams in there. Should I have said that? Subscribe, hit the notification button. And, sometimes I'm on 11 Warriors as Northern Nevada Buck. I'm on Buck Nuts at 247 as Radio 1979. So come join the conversations there as well. The Big Ten season is here. NFL preseason football is happening. I got the fever. How about you?